Entwistle, and I am the co-director of the Newburyport Literary Festival. We are in our 17th year of bringing authors and readers together. This is our third year as a virtual festival. I would like to thank you all for joining us for Literary Matchmaking, the author-agent relationship. And our moderator today is Meg Mitchell-Moore. She is the best-selling author of 6 novels and an integral member of the programming committee for the Newburyport Literary Festival. Her 7th novel, Vacation Land, will be out in June of 2022 from William Morrow. She lives in Newburyport with her husband, 3 daughters, and a much doted upon golden retriever. Meg, welcome. I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jen. And thank you to all 3 of you for joining us. I'm going to give a little short introduction of each of you, and then we will get into the panel. But as we talked before, happy to have it fluid. So we definitely love questions from the audience, and anything that you all want to talk about, feel free to take the conversation where you feel like taking it. Mike Meginnis is the author of Drowning Practice, just published in March of 2022, and Fat Man and Little Boy, published in 2014. His short fiction and essays have appeared in many, many publications, and his story Navigators appeared in Best American Short Stories 2012. He co-hosts the podcast Gift Horse with his partner, Tracy Ray Bowling, and he lives and works in Iowa City. Rachel Yoder is the author of Nightbitch from Doubleday, her debut novel released in July of 2021, which has also been optioned for film by Annapurna Pictures with Amy Adams set to star. She's a graduate of the Iowa Nonfiction Writing Program and holds an MFA in fiction from the University of Arizona. And Rachel also lives in Iowa City. Do you guys live close to each other or not? I don't know how big Iowa City is.
That's a good question.
I think the answer is probably like yes, and yet somehow I'm not sure that we've been in the same room since I moved here quite a while.
It's super weird. Yeah. We'll get coffee this summer.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Okay.
Monika Woods is a literary agent, writer, editor, and founder of Triangle House. She's a graduate of SUNY Buffalo and the Columbia Publishing course, and she's worked closely with leading voices in contemporary literature over her decade-long publishing career. She does not live in Iowa City. She lives in Springs, New York, close to the water, which sounds lovely. And I already said this about the questions, but just to make sure, feel free to chat. If you have anything to say, put that in the chat. But if you have an actual question that you would like anybody to answer, put it in the Q&A section. We'll get to those. We have a little under an hour left, so we'll get to those probably in the last 15 minutes, unless I happen to see something pop up that's relevant to what we're talking about. Then maybe I'll get to it a little bit earlier. Now, I thought what we could start with is having each of you 2 authors read a very short section of your book. I know typically we don't do a ton of reading on Zoom because it can get a little old, but because your books are so wonderful and so different from each other, and what we're talking about is how you both came to have Monika as your agent and what attracted her to your work, we could just get a little taste that way. So I think we'll start there. We'll start with Mike. I have a tiny description of your book, but you can feel free to add on if you'd like to before you read. In Drowning Practice, a 13-year-old girl and her mother confront the end of the world on a road trip in a dark, engaging novel, which Kirkus calls twisty and moving, an apocalypse novel that will keep readers guessing until the last page. Mike, when you're ready, why don't you give us a little taste?
Yeah, so I think that covers most of it. The main thing here is that everybody in the world has been given notice that the world is going to end. And so in the little bit that I'm going to read for you, there are a bunch of middle school students who are sharing their little essays about how they think the world is going to end. I'm going to read one of those very short essays for you. So, I'll go next, said Molly Coriel. She walked to the front of the class. What I think will happen in November. Everyone will fall down at the same time. If you're in the grocery store, you'll fall down in the fruits and veggies. If you're at your job, your face will fall down on your keyboard and spell a weird word. If you're at home in your bed, you won't fall down, but you won't get up either. Everyone will make a little surprised sound, like they just checked their mailbox and inside there was a letter from their friend. That's it.
Thank you. That's great. I really loved reading those. And I think that sense of impending doom is something that we're all living with now and have been for years. And doesn't seem to be getting that much better. So there's a lot to relate to with your book there. Now, Rachel, Nightbitch, which I loved, an artist turned stay-at-home mother becomes convinced she is turning into a dog. It was named a best book of the year in 2021 by Esquire and Vulture, and it was longlisted for the Penn Hemingway Award for Debut Fiction. Publishers Weekly and a starred review called it a guttural and luminous debut, and Vulture called it a must-read for anyone who can't get enough of the ever-blurring line between the psychological and supernatural that Yellow Jackets exemplifies. I'm a huge Yellow Jackets fan, so that is high praise indeed. Rachel, when you're ready, you could add a little more description if you need to, or otherwise just read us a little bit of your novel.
Sure, thank you for that. Yeah, so Nightbitch is about a one-time artist turned ambivalent stay-at-home mom who becomes convinced she's turning into a dog. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning, and there is a curse word, so content warning. When she had referred to herself as Nightbitch, she meant it as a good-natured, self-deprecating joke, because that's the sort of lady she was, a good sport, able to poke fun at herself, definitely not uptight, not wound really tight, not so freakishly tight that she couldn't see the humor in a lighthearted, not meant as an insult situation. But in the days following this new naming, she found the patch of coarse black hair sprouting from the base of her neck and was like, what the fuck? I think I'm turning into a dog, she said to her husband when he arrived home after a week away for work. He laughed and she didn't. She had hoped he wouldn't laugh. She had hoped that week as she lay in bed, wondering if she was turning into a dog, that when she said those words to her husband, he would tip his head to one side and ask for clarification. She had hoped he would take her concerns seriously. But as soon as she said the words, she saw this was impossible. Seriously, she insisted, I have this weird hair on my neck. She lifted her normal hair to show him the black patch. He rubbed it with his fingers and said, yeah, you're definitely a dog.
Thank you. That was great. I loved the husband character in that book. He just kept smiling away as things got crazier and crazier. It was phenomenal. Now, Monika, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what it was that attracted you to these two books? I'm sure you get many, many, many submissions. I want to talk to you a little bit later about something I read on Twitter about how you were taking a little break from submissions and why. But before we get to that, I'm sure you get many submissions every day, week, and month. And what was it about these two books that really attracted you?
Well, thank you for inviting me, everyone. I love listening to Mike and Rachel read. It's just exciting to be in conversation with them and with you. So I love books that are written by people who are smarter than me and by people who can make me feel something. I love to be forced to feel something. And I think that in very different ways, both Rachel's book and Mike's book exemplify that. I actually signed Rachel not on the basis of Nightbitch. I was working with her on a story collection that I really loved. And one of the things about her story collection, there's this one story in it that I think about all the time about like the kind of loss of innocence in a young woman's life. And I just knew reading that story that there was so much more depth to Rachel's work. And I was like, just excited to see where it would go. And then I was like waiting for her to finish editing it. And she goes, hey, I don't think I really want to do this story collection anymore. I started writing a novel about a mom who thinks she's turning into a dog. And I was like, drop everything and keep writing that and send it to me as soon as you can, because I want to read it. And then I actually went to Iowa City. I don't even remember when that was, guys, like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, who knows? And she like handed me a manila envelope with like 75 pages or something.
I don't remember any of this. I'm so glad you do. This is great to hear. It's very interesting.
I was like, and I just like hugged that little envelope and like read it as soon as I could. And I was just so excited. And then with Mike, I had actually heard like such great things about his work from some people that I know. And when he queried me with his book, I really love speculative novels and that kind of literary space of the intersection between just a really smart literary book and thinking about the future and thinking about the way things could be slightly different. And his book has made me cry every time I've read it. And we edited it for years and years and years together. And every time I read it at the exact same like word, I would just start to cry. And so with Mike's book, that feeling that he was able to convey over that in that one sentence every single time just like struck me as someone who was very in control of what they were trying to do with their book. And I just you don't see that every day. So between the two of these wonderful writers, there's a control of emotion, there's a point, like a pointed push to make your reader think or feel something, and there's just a lot of nuance and complexity and intelligence like layered throughout their books. And that's what I look for is that kind of emotion and cerebralness at the same time.
I love that. And I love that that can come about in any kind of book. It doesn't have to be, I mean, it could be a genre book. It could be anything. And both of you in your novels have some really strange things going on, and you have to be really good to pull that off and pull the human emotion into it. And I'm sure you were responding to a lot of that when you read them, and that's not easy to do. So congratulations to both of you on that. So Rachel, if you already knew Monika and were working with her on short stories, how did you first meet her, and how did that come about?
Yeah, well, I had this short story collection and had been talking to an editor from a small indie press. So I, had gotten to MFAs and I published a journal myself. And so just like knew a lot of people in sort of the indie publishing world. And wound up connecting with this editor who really liked my collection. And so she and I started working together and started editing it, and actually had the whole thing edited before I ever saw a contract. And when she did give me that contract, she had a lot of integrity. And I just like owe a lot to her for being such a stand-up person. So she gave me the contract. She said, you shouldn't sign this without having someone else look over it. And I know this wonderful agent who works with a lot of really cool indie writers and is willing to take them on. And so why don't you connect with her? And that was Monika. And it seemed like a really good fit. And I already had this contract. So Monika was going to help me with that deal, but which then did not wind up happening because the publisher kind of folded right at that minute. So as publishers do in the indie world. So then we had this manuscript, and as Monika said, things sort of changed direction. So I got her in a really kind of we met up in a kind of non-customary way.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. And it is such a, even with bigger publishing houses, things are changing all the time, and editors leave and publishers get bought by bigger publishers, and it's so hard to keep up. So having someone in your corner who knows what's going on is invaluable. Mike, I know that this is Drowning Practice is your second novel, and I meant to say this in the beginning. I mean, I did mention that you had published a novel in 2014. That was with a smaller press. So this is your first novel with a big publishing house. It's your first novel with Monika. So in some ways it's your debut, and in some ways it's not your debut. So how did you go about that transition from the first novel with a smaller press to Drowning Practice and to Monika?
Yeah, so in terms of how I first connected with Monika, I might get some of the sequence of these events wrong, but I think this is roughly the things that happened. So I know that I saw a joke that she made on Twitter, and that I thought the joke was funny. And I may have followed her right after that, but I did the thing that you do sometimes when you're like, oh, I like this joke and I don't know who this person is. So I look at the profile. Oh, this person's an agent and they made a joke that I like. Well, that seems good. So I went to her website, because at that point, I don't think this is still the case, although the website is probably still there. I imagine Monika could tell us. She had a blog where she was writing about the things that she was reading, and so I looked at that to kind of get a sense of what her taste was. And there was like one that was about a book that I really liked, that I had read recently. I think it might have been The Buried Giant. I know that that's one we've talked about. And there was a one by a friend as well, and so I could tell from what you written about those, like, okay, this might actually be a person who would be interested in the kind of thing that I do, because I definitely try to live in the sort of Ishiguro space, in terms of genre and what I'm doing there. And so then I did the thing that they will tell you to do if you talk to agents or you read the interviews and stuff that I had been doing dutifully for years, where it's like, okay, now I'm going to go read a couple interviews. I'm going to go see what this person has said they're interested in reading in terms of submissions. I'm going to go look at the page where they describe how they would like to be queried, and then I'm going to try and follow all those instructions very closely. Which is one of those. So when it worked out, when I sent the the little query and then I got the request for the manuscript, that felt like the system working in some ways, in a way that it doesn't always. But of course, then later I found out, like, also she'd already been given my work by an editor at at what was then my press, which was Black Balloon, which has since become Catapult. And so the groundwork had already been laid. But that was how we met each other and started working together. In terms of the transition to the larger press, can you give me a little bit more to think about in terms of like what you'd like to know about that transition, if you'd like me to keep talking?
Sure, yeah. So actually what I'd love to know, when you first sent your work to Monika, was that novel complete, or was it something that you were working on and you were looking for an agent?
It was this novel. Complete might be overstating it. As Monika said, we worked on it for years and years, which is an area of like some sensitivity for me, because I try to think of myself as I try to be a really professional person and to come with things really in good shape, and it took us a while to get it to a point where we could sell it, which is, to Monika's credit, that she told me up front that was going to be the case, that we did have some things to do to make it happen. I don't think either of us anticipated it taking quite as long as it did. But she stuck through that whole process with me, which I really appreciate. But nominally it was complete. It did have an ending, and the bit that makes her cry, I believe, has always been in place. I don't think that part's ever changed. Although I actually don't know the word. Do you know the?
I know what that was, so we don't give anything away. So
Yeah.
So when you published your first novel in 2014, did you have no agent, a different agent at that time?
I had no agent. So that was back when I think maybe they did this twice. They had the Horatio Nelson Prize was what they called it. And it was a contest nominally, but I was not normally a person who entered contests because I didn't appreciate paying people to read my work. And also I had read for contests and I knew what the other side of that looked like. And I'm generally not a huge fan. But that one was free, and they paid you if you won. So I was like, okay, that's a contest I can get behind. So I just submitted through that. And I had sort of briefly had agents before, but each of those were sort of a disaster experience, that never even, I'm not sure I was ever even quite signed, honestly.
Okay.
So it was a new thing.
So you were basically starting out new. All right. And for anybody watching who is looking for an agent, hoping one day to find an agent, these are wonderful stories, slightly unusual in that they had a little bit of an in somehow. And Monika had read Mike's work and met Rachel through this other way. I'm not a member of the panel, but I found my agent the old fashioned way, with all the querying, all the rejections. It took a really long time and I still did it. So I'm just wanting you to know that there are many ways to go about it. These are two, my experience is another, and there's probably 25 to 30 other ways to go about it too. So it's a confusing process, which I think is why people want to hear what everybody here has to say, but it's not the same for everybody. And you don't always have to have short stories published. Both of you have published a lot of short stories and essays. I hadn't. I have never published I've still never written a good short story. You don't have to. That's one way to go about it. It's not the only way. So again, in the Q&A, feel free to ask all your questions, but I just wanted to put that out there, that it can happen in a lot of different ways. It can take a short amount of time. It can take a long time, and you just never know until you're sort of in the middle of it. Now, Monika, what happened with these two books after you took them on? You did the editing that you needed to do. I don't know if you had editing to do with Rachel too, or if that was a quicker process there. And then you are ready to sell to a publisher. Can you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, well, I just want to say what you said about it being so many different ways of seeing success with your career. It translates on every single side. So like there's a way to get an agent, and there's like all those different ways. And then there's a way to get your book published, and there's all those different ways as well. And I feel like that's what I always tell people, is that I can only guarantee that I have no idea what's going to happen, and that anything could happen. And so, I feel like both, it's funny, like both Rachel and Mike have such great, to me, narratives of their work coming out in the world, but they're both very different. So for Mike, we worked on his novel for a very long time. And I will say, when you asked if his novel was complete, when he sent it to me, it was a really, like, what I call a milestone draft. So my big encouragement to writers is to not share your work until you think of it as a milestone, which to me is that you've put every single resource that you have at your disposal into it to try and get it to a place where, like, you have nothing left to bring it to it on your own. And you need someone else's brain in there then. And that's what he and I would do as well, where, like, we would get it to the point where we both were done and had to spend our own resources. And that was when we knew it was time to send it out. And so he sent me a milestone draft that really spoke to me. And we then got to work editorially. Usually what I do is I either send a memo, or we have a very in-depth call about what edits need to be made. And I try to even do that before I sign someone, because one of the things I also really believe in is that the editorial vision that an agent has to at least match or extrapolate the editorial vision that a writer has. I can't do anything or have any ideas that don't come straight from the work or that come from the author. So in a lot of ways, all I do is, like, put a magnifying glass to what the authors have already done. And so, for me, it's like, okay, well, here's what I think. Like, an example I always give is, let's say you've written a literary novel about a young protagonist, similar to what Mike has done partially with his book. And then an agent reads it, and it's like, I love it, I want to sign it, it's the best YA book I've ever read. And you're like, hey, wait a minute, I don't see it that way. I think it's a literary novel. I don't want it to go to a YA publisher. Like, you have to stop and say, hey, our visions are not the same. What you see as my future and what you see as someone who would come to my book as a reader is different than what I see. So maybe we aren't the best fit. So I really try to come to an author with that conversation already, like, over. Like, we've had that conversation before we start working on their books. And with Rachel, like, again, we came to we kind of, like, it almost felt like fate, because, like, we had this friend in common. I had actually done a book with that editor with another writer who's also a visual artist, and who also writes about the intersection of, like, writing and personhood and art and class. And so I was really primed to read Rachel's work. And again, it was a little different because we had an editor in place for that project, and we never ended up putting it out. But when I came to Nightbitch, again, she slid over a printed up partial of 75 pages. And my job with Rachel was just to be like, keep going, like, just really encouraging to, like, put more words on the page, and tell her how excited I was to read it, like, because sometimes a writer needs someone to be there at the other side to be, like, waiting to read something, because as a writer, you're so internal, you're so in your own head, and you're always wondering, like, does anybody even care about what I'm saying? That you care, but you don't know if anybody else does. So my role with Rachel is a little different than my role with Mike, because he came to me with a full draft of a novel, whereas Rachel, it was a little bit different. But yes, for Mike, it was like, I was reading, I was doing notes, I was on calls with him, we were discussing things. There are a lot of really big changes that were made in Mike's book that we did together. And with Rachel, it was like, hey, where's the next 50 pages? Like, I'm ready, like, let's keep going. And so, like, some writers need deadlines, some writers need encouragement, some readers just need you to check in once a year. And so with these two, it was, like, different for each of them. And it was just really
right. That's so interesting. And what strikes me with how you're talking now, and with my own experience with my agent, is the good agents have so much patience for authors at different stages of the process. And you have not made a dime at this point from the work, because the work hasn't sold, and you were doing this on faith. You presumably have your other authors who are already published, or you have an income from your agency, but it's a really time-consuming, very faith-based thing you're doing, taking on people who might never finish the book or who might not agree with your vision, and you've already put all this time into it. So it's a hard job being an agent, from what I've observed in that way. You really have to believe.
I love that about it. Like I'm very lucky. I have my own agency. I get to do what I want. No one's like asking me what my quarterly updates are or whatever, anything like that. So I'm very, very lucky and privileged. But I do think it's a hard job, but like I love it. And the other thing I like about it is that you get to do a lot of different things at the same time. So I get to be an editor. I get to be a like amateur publicist. I get to be an amateur lawyer. Like I get to do a lot of different things. And it all intersects in just like trying to have a vision for a career that's more than just like, oh, let's get this book sold. What's next? Like, how do we get your book translated to film? How do we get your short story an award? How do we like get you an award? And I like to think that like I'm looking at a book at the first, but when I sign an agency agreement with a client, I signed a client. I don't sign a project. So I'm not signing someone because I like their one book. I'm signing someone because I think they have a future like way beyond that.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. So Mike, you have Monika has your book. You've edited it many times. It's ready to go out. What did that process look like from your point of view as it was about to sell to a publisher?
Yeah, so we went out twice. We went through the process that Monika talked about, and sometimes I know the year that we did this, sometimes I don't. Logic tells me it must have been 2018 that we went out for the first time. I think that's right, because I think it was before I switched to my current day job. And so we had been through this editorial process for a few years now, and we'd gone back and forth, and we'd sort of like Monika said, it turned out we hadn't hit the end of the process, but we'd hit the end of what we could do without some additional input, right? So we went out, Monika, emailed folks and did the usual thing. And then I had a conversation with, I think it was just one editor that I actually ended up speaking to in that process. There was one who was maybe looking at possibly acquiring it if they could get support from other folks in the publisher. And there was first, I did a little sample revision to sort of show what it would look like if I took the notes that editor was suggesting in order to get the book to a place where they would feel good running with it. And so I did that sample based on that conversation, and then they didn't end up picking it up. And I then talked to Monika, and my memory of it is, and Monika, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, that you were sort of asking like, okay, how do you want to proceed from here? And there were a couple of possibilities that we considered, but I had liked the feedback from that editor enough that I was like, I'm just going to rewrite the whole book from that feedback. And so I rewrote the middle act like completely. I added a whole new location that a person who read it now would be very surprised to learn that it was not there. And I had to change a lot of characters' relationships and stuff to make that work. And so after a couple more years of revising on that basis, we went out with it again in 2020. I think it was March.
I want to interrupt you for 1 second because there was one revision that you were like, this is done. And I was like, hey, I have something really hard to tell you. And I told it to you in person. The same week
yes.
I got the paper from Rachel. I said, I have something I want to tell you, and I don't think you're going to like it, but I think we need to cut a whole character. And it was like this moment where it was like, I was like scared to tell it. And Mike took it really well. And then like, he was like, okay, I have to think about this. And then like, he emailed me and he was like, I think you're right, I'm going to do it. Because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. You've read a book so many times and there's things that you've loved about it all along. But then all of a sudden you have a whole new perspective and clarity. And I had that with Mike's book. And I was like, okay, before we go out with this, you had to get rid of this one character, I think. And then that's when we were finally, after he did that, we were finally able to take it out in early 2020, which was really not the best time to go out with the book. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You can pick it up where I left off.
No, you're good. And you're right. And one of the reasons that I know you were so right that I had to cut that character is I'm sitting here like, I think I know which one it was, but I'm not even 100% certain anymore because there were like a couple of things that sort of peeled out together. But yeah, nobody would miss them. No one has any idea who this character is because they are just so easily gone now. But so the only other thing I was going to say about that is this was a book about the apocalypse that we went out with in March of 2020. And that was a harrowing experience for us and for readers. And I don't really have anything, there's nothing useful to say about that. But it is my dominant memory of that moment professionally, is like thinking like, okay, so the world is ending a little bit. Is that going to be a problem for me personally? Does this affect me at all? There's a pandemic.
That's the point where the book sold.
Yes, I believe, pen to paper in June of 2020.
It always takes so long. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. Great. I love that. Rachel, what about you? So you finally finish it. Not finally, you finish it. You give it to Monika, and then what happens?
Yes. So we, I don't know if you want me to talk about editorial or just talk about going out.
Yeah, I'd like editorial too.
I mean, I just remember like the really helpful thing that Monika had me do, in that we didn't edit for too long, but you did say you need to write a calendar and like put all these events on a calendar, which I had been like, I didn't want to do that. It's just at the point where I'm like, I can't go back through this again and do it. And she's like, no, you're going to. And I'm like, okay. And it was really helpful. It was painful and incredibly helpful. And it got the whole book straightened out. So that was just, I was so grateful for that. So we wound up going out on submission in January of 2020. So a few months before the apocalypse. And I remember Monika just being very strategic and being like, I'm going to send it to editors who are moms, which I thought was like a great angle. And so we had this list of like 15 people. And it happened, I don't know like how this process, Monika, compares to others, but to me, it was just like really fast. She would kind of be like, we got some passes, but let's not think about that. And then all of a sudden she's like, I have 2 editors. Can you talk to them? I mean, literally, like, was it like a week or 2 weeks after, like she sent out the email and then they requested manuscripts. So I wound up talking to 2 different editors, and one of them, I thought both of the conversations went really well. One of them was pretty intense. Like I'd never been on a call with an editor, and she had a lot of notes, and I thought they were all very intelligent notes. But the main one is that I was probably gonna have to change the title of the book and change the main character's name. And that one was hard to hear. And I didn't know if that would be feasible. And then the other editor really understood the spirit of the book, and also had notes, very intelligent notes, but was like, I think we can make the title work. And I think we should make the title work. I think it's really important. And so it was just really clear that our visions were a lot more aligned, and she just kind of like got what the book was trying to do in this like really central core sense. So yeah, and then I wound up going with hers, and it was a preempt, so there wasn't a lot of what, like she made a preempt offer. We couldn't really wait around for other people to read it or offer, and then it was just done.
And that's Margot, right?
I know Margot, a Doubleday.
Yeah, because I had 2 books published with Doubleday, and it was at the time her boss, who's no longer there.
Yeah.
So I knew Margot when she was Melissa's assistant, and now it's so exciting to see what's happening.
Yeah, she's amazing, and she's so young, and she's so smart. I'm just like, how did you get so smart so quickly? Like
she was that smart like 5 years ago too.
Yeah, exactly.
She's fantastic. I really love her. So that's great. I love hearing that, and especially about the title of your book too, because I could see not everybody's going to be on board with that, but it's so important to what the book is. So, and I think also it's also important for aspiring writers to hear that you can also wait for the right person to come along. You didn't have to wait too long, but sometimes you might be so desperate to get an agent that you think, I'll take any agent. It doesn't matter what they want, or the agent should take any editor as long as I sell the book. But that's not, you have to be more patient than that. And you have to stand your ground if there's something that's really important, because it could change the whole trajectory of your book in a way that you didn't mean for it to happen. So thank you. I love those stories. So
I tend to think a bad agent is worse than no agent. I always say that. I don't think that writers believe me, but I really believe that. And I feel like with both of these guys, there's different reasons why they've been patient and had different like strategies, but they're both very patient, dedicated to their crafts. And to me, another thing I always say is it starts with the work. Like the work is the most important thing. Everything flows from there. And that's why you see like Mike focusing so hard on his edits, working so hard on them, and Rachel like going with her gut and like knowing that Margot got her vision. And like that's when a book achieves its best form, when you have someone who sees that vision.
right, for sure. And I like also what that the two of you have to trust what Monika is telling you in the same way that she has to trust that you're going to keep working on what you're working on, because without that trust, it could just go haywire so quickly. I mean, if my agent tells me something, I've known her for a long time now, and I know that she's always right. She's always right. So I know that, but if I didn't know that, I would be second guessing everything she said. You know, it's really, so for you all to trust each other in the way that you do, I think is unusual and really wonderful. So that's great. So now that the dust has settled, it's settled a little more for you, Rachel, because your book has been out since 2021, summer of 2021. And Mike, you're pretty new. Yours just came out in March, right? What surprised you the most? What horrified you the most? Or what delighted you the most about your book coming out? You can answer all three if you want, or if you want to pick one, go for it. Rachel, we'll start with you.
Sure. I guess what surprised me a lot, there are a couple of things. You know, I had one in-person book event. So it was a lot of interviews online and events online. And I wasn't like prepared for sort of like the intensity of all of it, because I thought it was just going to be, it's fine. It's just like talking to people and it's not even in person. But I found that whole experience, and maybe just the pace of it right around when the book came out, to be incredibly intense in a way I hadn't been prepared for, especially too, because the book came from such a personal impulse. I think I was figuring out how to kind of like separate my experience from like the story of the book, or figuring out how to talk about both of them simultaneously. So that was really surprising to me. Also surprising was that, you know, I wrote the book because I felt so alone in my experience of motherhood. And I also, part of the reason I kept, you know, sending pages to Monika was because I was like, is this too crazy? Is this too weird? Because I really hadn't, you know, ever worked on a really long piece of something that's kind of slipstreamy or surreal. And she's like, no, it's not too weird. Keep going. So I sort of had these insecurities about it. And then when it came out, to just all of a sudden start getting messages from people where they're like, this is my experience too. And I'm like, really? And then it just like kept happening. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like I thought I was a, you know, totally unique individual and completely alone. And it turns out I wasn't.
Right.
So that was,
people come up to me too all the time, and they're like, how did she do that? Like, I just saw myself so much in this character. Motherhood has like a primal universality to it.
It really does. And my kids are all teenagers now, and it still brought me right back to everything so quickly. It was really amazing in that way. Mike, what has been your experience in the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks since your book has come out?
So I mean, it's funny. I had such low expectations for myself as a kid, you know, growing up the way that I did, and in the circumstances where I did, that I tell people, and I don't know that they believe that I mean this literally. My plan as a kid was to work in Walmart and die in a ditch. Like that was where I thought things were gonna go for me. And so like for me, the most surprising thing about any experience is usually everything that goes well, and that's partly just like about what's wrong with how my brain works. But like, so the most surprising thing for me has been like, I had some good reviews, and I get, you know, good responses from people. And it's interesting because my book is also about motherhood in some ways, but obviously it's a very I'm not currently a mother. That's not something I'm probably going to be doing. And so it's been surprising to me that it has been as well received on those terms as it has. Although I think that's partly people are willing to extend some generosity when the name at the top of the page is Mike. But I think that I think that the biggest surprise is that things have gone as well as they have for me, and I am constantly having all the like weird bad feelings that you expect to have when a book comes out, and I'm able to conveniently like those kind of live with me. And that's my main advice to people who like want to come through this, honestly, is like you're allowed to have all your crazy upsetting experiences and feelings and get anxious, and like I look at all the things that I'm not supposed to look at in terms of like ways to guess how much I'm selling, right? Like all the things that I've been told not to look at on Amazon. I totally do, and I do that privately, and then I deal with the frustration on my own, and everybody is very understanding, and the good news is still good, and that part is great.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I just ignore everything unless something good comes to me, and then I feel like, okay. So
That's what you should do.
It's a great strategy.
it took me a
Yeah.
while to learn that. I didn't do it in the beginning, but that's what I do now. So speaking of advice, Monika, what advice do you have for anybody watching this who is thinking that in the future, near or far, they might want to start looking for an agent? What should they do? What should they not do?
My biggest advice is to read contemporary fiction or nonfiction, whatever. Read contemporary work in the area that you want to publish in, so you can understand who like your peers and fellows are, and to keep track of the people who work on those books that you really like. You know, if you read Nightbitch or Drowning Practice and you thought, oh my gosh, those were lodestones for me, you look at the acknowledgements and say, oh, Monika Woods is the agent and Gabriella Dube and Margot Schickmanter are the editors. Keep that data for yourself. And then when you're ready for that milestone draft to get shared, you have a trove of people who might have taste that matches yours. And then you have like that just at your fingertips. If you keep track of the books that you really love and you read books that are being published right now, then you have this amazing like data set of people who are working on books that you like right now, who will be ready to look at your work when you're ready for that. Like, I really do think that you have to trust in your instincts and work as much as you can and read as much as you can and be a part of that conversation as much as you can, so that when your book is ready to enter the conversation, you're ready to support it.
That's really good advice. Really good advice. Rachel, this is a little bit off topic, but one thing I wanted to ask you more about was about the experience of having your book optioned for a movie. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. That was crazy. I mean, I guess that came up actually right as the whole pandemic started. Monika introduced me to a film agent. And I still, I guess somehow, and maybe Monika, you can speak to how like a book gets to that world or how a manuscript goes there, but somehow it was there in that world. And so I started working with this film agent, and basically the process was she had producers who had read the book manuscript and were interested in it. And so I took meetings with, I don't know, 4 or 5 different production companies. And there were 2 that really kind of like were the main ones, were the biggest ones. And had at very, one of them had an actress attached and the other one didn't. And it was very stressful actually, because the pandemic was happening and there were like movie production companies being like, we need an answer by 5 p.m. on Friday. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on right now. Like the world's ending, but we're making a movie. Like, and so Dana Spector, my film agent, was very helpful at like, with helping me like navigate all of that. Cause that was like a totally foreign world to me and very stressful. So things, I mean, a lot of things sort of developed during the, as these two production companies were in play until finally Amy Adams came into the picture. And then it seemed obvious, like, which deal to go with. But that took, I think, like 6 months, at least 6 months to finally kind of like get closed and get contracts signed. But yeah, that was a wild, weird time in 2020, to be sure.
Do you know where that project is now?
Yeah, I mean, again, against all odds, they're planning to start shooting in September if all goes well. Yeah, everyone's like, it's a miraculous, your movie is getting made. And I'm like, okay, like, let's not talk about it, knock on wood. We'll just pretend it's not until it actually is.
Right.
So
yeah, but that's I mean, a lot of times you hear about the beginning of the process, something gets optioned, nothing ever happens after that. So to hear something that's that far along is very impressive indeed, but I won't jinx it by asking any more about it.
I always say the film process is like icing on the cake and a whole different artistic experience for a writer. I one time, when my first job in publishing X amount of years ago, I was working on with an agent who had a book who was in its 28th option period, which means that they had re-upped the option at that point 28 times. And an option period can be anything from 6 months to 18 months. So I bet they're in their like 100th option at this point. They don't want to let it go. So they think, oh, we're going to make it someday, but they're freezing up those rights. And then it's like free money for the author.
Yeah, wow.
Coming in. So, to me, it's always like, we can't bank on anything happening. We're just going to try our best. We want to get read out in the world. Maybe your next book, someone will remember reading this one and things will happen more. And yeah, it was I remember it so clearly. It was such a strange time. I was like looking out my windows on the phone with all these, like doing all these things. And I would hang up and like look at my husband, who's also working from home in the pandemic, being like, this is crazy. Amy Adams wants to like be Nightbitch. That again, to me, it's like the book and holding the book and having the book come out and having it be read is the priority. And then the film stuff is all just like extra. And it is a cool experience, of course, but yeah, like Rachel's a writer. She's not like an act, you know what I mean? So like the book is the art object. The book is the thing that we're working on.
Right. I think that's a great attitude. It's like a nice bonus if it happens, for sure. I love that.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, what is next for you? Have you started your next book? No pressure.
I have so the pace on the edits was like kind of perfectly tuned to frustrate efforts to start a new book, because I would kind of get in there and I would start working on one and then it would be like, well, we need to go back to edits. And then I would get back to the book I've been working on. I was like, oh, well, I hate this now. So I've started like 10 books in that window, but there was also like, I was dealing with some other stuff. But I do think I have one now, but because I've had so many die in this process, I am very superstitious. Monika knows that I have worked on something at some point. That's as much as she knows. It's as much as basically anybody knows about this one, is that at some point I wrote something and probably I'm going to continue doing that. I have to get back into it now because I was making good progress and then the book came out and I had to focus on that. But I am currently in the process of reading through what I have and persuading myself like, yes, continue.
Yeah, I love it. Well, good luck. Good luck. How about you? Oh, we have a couple we have 10 more minutes in the session. We have 2 questions. So Rachel, tell us if you're working on something next, if you want to talk about it. If you don't, that's okay too. And then we'll get to these 2 questions.
Yeah, just really quick. I'm returning to that short story collection that first brought us together, which has been really fun to go back to. So
great. I can't wait to read it. All right, now we will go to these 2 questions. Jennifer Shepard asks, I am currently working on edits for the 3rd draft of my first book, a memoir. I'm wondering if agents prefer to receive work that is super clean or still in progress. Thank you for your input. Monika?
Great question. Memoirs are all about the writing. It's not like a nonfiction book that's about research or current events or a topic of interest, right? Like it's like a novel. It's about the writing, but the characters are real and they're you, right? So because of the fact that it's a art and prose based decision for someone to take it on, agents and editors like to see those fully written, especially if you're a debut memoirist. So again, it's the same for me. A memoir is the same advice as a novel, is to write the whole thing, to, you know, get a milestone draft going, put all your resources into it, and then be ready to share it when your instincts tell you, hey, this needs another brain on it.
Great. I love it. Thank you. And by the way, we have still time for a few more questions. If anybody has anything to ask, type it in. We have a question here from Laura, who is another member of the Literary Festival Committee. And she would like to know, Monika, what would be a dream submission for you right now?
Another great question. Well, I'm currently closed to submissions not on referral because I have never done that in my whole career. And I wanted to start off 2022 with like an ability to focus not only on the 11 manuscripts I got in the first week of 2022 when things opened back up, but also I had 9 books coming out this year and I added a 10th, like, because I am a glutton for experience. So I have 10 books in the 2022 year. And I was just kind of like, that's a lot of books. That's more than I've ever had. Never had that many. I really need to like give each one my full attention. And the thing about queries and being open for submissions is that sometimes you need to drop everything to read one. And you know, sometimes there's a situation where like you just really like it and you need to read it and you kind of ignore your work because you have to read it. Or it's a writer who has a lot of interest and they're like, hey, other agents are circling this and you have to read it because of that. And I just didn't want that focus be taken away from my current clients. So I closed to queries this January. I will be opening back up in June when my interns start. I get summer interns and I love sharing queries with them. So I'm going to open back up for that. And so in June, what my dream query would be is just something, again, that's really smart and original and makes me feel something I've never felt before. Right now, I'm really interested in historical novels. I really love anything that has like kind of like a real life element to it. I like really long novels too. So I would love to like go out with like a doorstop. That would be really fun. I'm reading the Olga Tokarczuk Books of Jacob right now, and it's 1,000 pages long and it counts down. So it starts at page 1,000 and then goes 999. So like something that does something really cool like that, that's like a really neat trick or twist, but that doesn't feel cumbersome, I would love. Nonfiction wise, I would love to sign some more journalists. I would love to do an investigation of like contemporary religious practices and or feminist religions practices next to each other. I really want to work on a book about backlash. I think that would be a really interesting nonfiction project to be working on. But yeah, I'm still, I mean, that is in my mind because it's almost May now, right? But oh wait, today's May 1st. So like I have one more month of not having queries in. So I have to clear out my queue before I can open back up.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I read your post about that. And I think it must be so hard to balance what you're saying, taking care of your existing clients, whether or not they have a book coming out or they're working on something that they hope to sell. There's so many different pieces to the process and you have to track all of them. You know, the writers are doing their own one thing, but you're doing it for 10 to 20 people at a time, which is very challenging. So I see why you closed, but I'm sure people will be so excited when you open back up again. We have one more question from Anonymous that says, what are your recommendations for writing a synopsis? What should you include or not include? That's a great question because I was very puzzled by that. I remember when I was looking for an agent.
A synopsis is different to me than like a query letter. In the query letter, I like to see a small paragraphs of synopsis. And what I like that to do is like give a vibe and also give me some productive information. I don't want anything to be really spoiled for me or given away because I am that kind of reader that like doesn't like to know what's going to happen. I actually don't require synopses when I get a query. I can do that myself if I read it. Like I don't need someone to do that for me. But if you're writing a synopsis and you're trying to give your reader an idea, what I would actually recommend you do is read the back of a book. So pull Nightbitch off the shelf, read the catalog copy that her editor wrote. Like that's a professional synopsis writer. And go copy that. Like do what all the editors do. All the publicity material that you see on Amazon, bookshop.org, on a book, on an author's website has been written by professionals. So you can just steal that and do it for yourself.
Great advice. Yeah, I really like that. Do you authors have anything to add to that? Or did you not have to go through the exact synopsis process? It's true, not all agents require them, but some ask for them.
Yeah, I don't I didn't have to go through that, obviously, but I have since for various projects had to write synopses, and I actually find it to be a really great exercise. You know, when you're trying, it helps you to see your book and see the themes, and to really like boil it down to like what is essential. And so in that way, I mean, I think it's a great thing to do, whether or not you put it in your cover letter.
I think that's great too.
Yeah.
That?
Yeah, briefly, I'm really bad at synopses, and so like the jacket copy on my book was written by my editor, I believe, and I didn't even question. I was like, sure, whatever you put on there, I'm sure it's better than what I would do. One thing I would say though, from like when I was querying, because I did have to send Monika a summary then, is I think you need to answer the question as quickly as possible of why a person would read this book instead of another book. And also I have noticed good synopses that sell things are often just a little bit misleading. And I don't mean they're dishonest. What I mean by that is they will leave things out that feel important to the author because they are not important to the pitch. And so usually when my work is synopsized by someone who's trying to sell it to somebody else, they leave things out that feel important to me, and learning the skill of like what to leave out that feels important to you but is not part of the pitch seems really important. I don't know that I'm good at it, but I've noticed that that is a thing that they do.
That's really smart.
I want to record that and play it for all my clients when I'm writing letters.
That is really good advice. So true.
These two are very wise. Listen to both of them.
Yes, they are very wise. All right, 2 more questions snuck in. I think we have time. Where can we find Monika's blog? Do you still have that on your website, or do you not have a blog anymore? Or where do we find you?
I don't write in my blog anymore, but I do run a literary magazine called Triangle House Review, and I will review stuff for that every once in a while or do an interview. Our most recent issue, I interviewed Jackie S., who wrote the book Daryl, which I thought was really great.
Say again what it's called?
Daryl.
I'm sorry, the publication.
Triangle House Review. So if you go to the Triangle House Literary website, there's another little toggle and it's the review right there.
Okay, got it. And then let's see if we have time for this. Amy Reardon says, I was just wondering what you call this category of literary fiction about women and motherhood that would include Nightbitch and the School for Good Mothers. Is there a category or subgenre for that?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I think that people call it literary fiction. And when there are these kinds of horror or speculative elements to it, it's like cross genre, and you usually say like horror, literary horror, or like literary speculative. I think that people think of Drowning Practice as like literary speculative, and the School for Good Mothers as well. Just because it's about a woman doesn't mean it gets its own genre. I don't think people are really saying like women's fiction as much anymore. So yeah, each book usually has its own like metadata, and if you go on their Amazon pages, it's got tags, right, of like all the things that the editor and publisher like thinks the category that it fits in, and they usually try to do as many as possible so that they get as many clicks as possible.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, that's good to know. Even I didn't really know that. Okay, great. Hi, Jen, you're back. Are we done?
Hi, I'm back. Yes, my face means it's over. But I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the panelists. This was a great discussion. I'd be here if it wasn't for the audience. Thank you very much, everyone. And
all right, great.
Great day,
everybody.